All right, so today we have on Dax. Dax, you kind of spearheaded the Open Next project, which is to be able to host NextJS yourself in a more complete way. And then also, you have been in the world of startups, open source, VC, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to kind of hit a twofold talk today, both about why it's hard to actually host NextJS, and then on top of it, VC, open source, direction, problems, good parts, all that good stuff. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Is there anything you would like people to know about you other than... No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to make an inside joke. See, I almost made an inside joke.
No, we're good. We can get started.
All right. So every single time someone brings up Next.js, inevitably, 100% of the time it says someone else will respond, well, Next.js is easy. Why don't you just throw it in a Docker container? Skill issues. Like that's the 100% response every single time. Can you explain in a very complete set why just throw it in a Docker container is in fact a skill issue onto itself when you say that?
Yeah. Okay, so I think the way to understand Next.js is they're a framework, but unlike other frameworks, they have an extra capability that nobody else really has. When they run into a problem, they can choose to solve it in the framework or solve it with infrastructure because they also own an infrastructure platform, right? Everybody else that builds a framework, they can only solve it in the framework because they don't know where you're deploying to. It might be, the wide ranges of ways that you can deploy stuff. So the other frameworks don't even have an option between these two choices. And understandably, and so I think a lot of people think that when I say that it's challenging to self-host, they assume it's like malicious or they're doing it on purpose. It doesn't need to go that far at all. They just have the capability of solving problems in these two different ways. So understandably, when they run into a problem...
Can we pause one quick second? So for those that don't know, Next.js is owned and created by Vercel, and Vercel has a very large and sophisticated hosting platform in which Remix just does not have Remix hosting. That is nearly the same capability. There you go, right?
Exactly.
All right, sorry for interrupting.
So, no, that makes sense. Good clarification. I think... So when you have these two options and you run into a problem, you're like, a users are facing this problem, we want to solve it. Oftentimes, like the best, coolest, most performant version of that solution ends up being an infrastructure solution, right? It gets surfaced as a framework feature, but it depends on a very specific infrastructure. And they have they're unique in this way.
Can you explain that a bit more or give a concrete example of what that means?
Yeah, so a very simple example is they have this new feature called PPR. It's kind of complicated to explain, but basically the idea is the static parts of your website that never change, like the outer shell, the header, whatever, those get compiled ahead of time and like sent to the edge, and those get flushed out really quickly. So when you hit the website, like that part shows up very, 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 very quickly. And that's a framework feature, like you'll see it as like documented as a Next.js PPR feature, but it requires a very, very specific infrastructure setup to make that feature actually work. And today it's really only supported on Vercel. Cloudflare had a quick demo of getting it working there too, but it's a lot more complex than, just something you would just serve out of a single request.
All right, so to kind of color that for those that don't know, it involves a React suspense, right? So effectively, when you create a new page or you update your page, everything that's outside of the first suspense, something that can just be rendered straight up, gets cached and sent somewhere to a CDN, right? Effectively what happens. Like that's a very sophisticated operation to where every single time your CDN versus what you're rendering is out of date, it's able to update and know to update those items. Whereas all the suspense features are not a part of that CDN. That means they have a deep integration with React and with the ecosystem to be able to accomplish something like that. So when you say that there is stuff that can be solved at an infrastructure level, that would definitely, I now understand what you mean by solved at an infrastructure level.
And so their case, they take it even further. So it's not just that it's served at the edge. It all happens over a single request. So like when the request comes in, first it gets handled by edge, and then it flushes that part out. And that same request then later hits origin, gets the rest of it, and that part gets flushed out. So it all happens on a single request. And you just can't do that in a simple way that's like very, very sophisticated. Astro has like a similar feature where they like try to achieve the same thing. And it's a lot simpler. In like the most extreme cases, like the Next.js approach is better. But the Astro approach, because they don't have this ability to say, we demand this infrastructure, they have a more general solution for it. I personally think it lands in like a better set of trade-offs. Like it still kind of works in the way you want it to, and also it's very simple and portable. But again, it's just subjective on, do you want to go for the absolute best or the absolute, simplest, most portable?
So what does it take to actually run OpenNext? Like what are in the highest, most simple level you can possibly give us? What does it actually take, and why is it not just a Docker container, bro?
Yeah, exactly. So the other side of this is Next.js is a very large framework with a lot of features. And it's unlikely that you are using all of them because it tries to be everything for everyone. So depending on what you're building, you're going to use some subset of the features. So oftentimes, if you're just building something very simple and you use Next.js, throwing it in a single Docker container might work because the features that you're using, don't have particular issues. But there's a lot of features. There's like stuff like ISR. I mean, all the acronyms.
I would assume images. Don't they do something special with images as well?
Image optimizations. Yeah. So, and again, it's very, again, there's just a lot of features and there's a lot of versions of Next.js. Things behave slightly differently in each. But
what about bundling? Is there special bundling that happens as well with?
Yeah, so they provide, and this is the other tricky thing. So when you do a normal Next build, you get like the standard outputs. Vercel themselves don't use that. They have like a special kind of like a hidden flag inside the CLI that puts out like a different type of output that's more optimized in certain ways. So if you're trying to build something similar to Vercel in your own infrastructure, you kind of want to use that, but it's not documented and it's not meant to be consumed publicly. So it changes and it breaks all the time. Going back to the Docker case, though, a very simple example is Next.js loves cache. Like everything they do is like just crazy caching stuff.
Yes.
When you have a single Docker container, cache is easy. It's in your memory. Great.
Yes.
Let's say you add a second Docker container. Cache can't be in memory anymore because you need to invalidate it, right? Like if something changes on one container, it's now out of date on the other one. Next.js provides APIs for you to implement your own cache adapter. So you can solve this problem, but the point is it's not solved out of the box, right? You have to figure out, okay, how am I going to centralize a cache? Am I going to do it in S3? Am I going to do it in Redis? Like, am I going to keep it in memory and like message each container when something's invalidated?
You never even said SQLite, which is a little offensive, but that's okay.
SQLite replicated, yeah. So you can just do whatever you want, but it's not solved out of the box for you, right? Like it just depends on what you want to do. So there's just like 100 of these tiny little, like almost like paper cuts that show up when you're trying to like use Next to the full degree. And if you go to the OpenNext site and it's not organized in a way to make this point, but if you like read through the docs, you'll come up on, hey, this feature is like slightly broken in this way, and here's like 4 different ways you can deal with it. So it's a lot of the work is not code or anything technical. It's just reverse engineering all these features, understanding them, and then documenting potential solutions that we come up with. And that's obviously a big community effort because I don't use Next.js. No one on my team uses Next.js. This is really pushed by 2 lead maintainers they're volunteers. They're big Next.js fans, and they work on this. Plus a community bringing up issues that they've had and solutions that they've run into.
Okay, so what this really comes down to is when somebody says just throw it in a Docker container, what they actually mean is I use a minimal set of JS features. I pretty much use Next.js as a simple routing mechanism, and I generate some basic HTML and nothing else. Therefore, what you're saying makes no sense. It's actually easy.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely believe it works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everyone. Notably, the reasons you should be using Next.js are the features that are hardest to self-host.
Yes. Okay. This makes a lot more sense. Because I knew generally my rule of thumb, as I was just telling you this earlier, my general rule of thumb is that you're not going to work on something unless if there's like a real actual benefit here. So I would imagine you spending a bunch of time playing around and making OpenNext work isn't just a passion project by Dax, right? Like they're passion project, Dax.
And that's honestly, that's like what I want to respond every time someone tries to argue with me. It's like the literal existence of this project is the proof. Like I would love to shut this thing down. Like the ultimate goal is this stuff gets like documented within Vercel, within the Next.js docs. Certain APIs are cleaned up, like fewer patches are needed. If it gets to that point, we'll just shut this thing down. Like this isn't like our passion. Like none of us, like I said, no one on the team uses Next.js. We kicked this off because we help people deploy anything. Next.js is super popular, and we just had so many people being like, can you help? Can you help? Can you help? We said no for like over a year because, again, we just didn't like Next.js. And eventually we're like, all right, we just have to do this because people want it.
All right. So someone is saying, I agree with some of what Dax is saying. I don't think you can agree with some of what he is saying. He literally just said caching is hard. And if you do a certain, like these pre-renders out to CDNs, like something has to be set up to do that whole entire understanding of your application and being it. Like, I mean, the reverse proxy that's required to understand rendering in React is very impressive, right? But nonetheless, you know, there's nothing really to disagree. But he says, but OpenNext seems to be for serverless, and I don't really care. Docker's fine. Is that so? Is OpenNext purely for serverless, or do these problems exist without serverless?
No, it exists without serverless too. And I will acknowledge that a lot of the documentation and structure is for a serverless deployment. Because again, we're just reflecting what the majority of companies want to do, and this is what they want to do in their AWS account. But again, if you like read through the docs, you see a lot of the issues actually apply whether you're doing serverless or Docker. Another quick example is Next.js does not output standard cache control headers. Their SWR header is not like to the spec. So
why not? Isn't it just like etag and something else and bada bing, bada boom, you're done?
So there's a new feature, new-ish. The spec has been super old, but CDNs hadn't implemented it for a while. It's called stale while revalidate. This header was not around for a long time, and finally, like AWS implemented it, Cloudflare implemented it, or is implementing it in the past couple of years. And Next just wasn't outputting that in the way that you would need it to. So even if you're using a Docker container, if you just put a standard CDN in front of it and you use anything that depends on the stale while revalidate, you'll get incorrect behavior. So again, I understand why you personally got it working, but about.nike.com uses OpenNext to deploy this, right? Totally different scale, totally different level of this needs to work correctly. And you're just not going to run into these issues unless you have a whole community that's talking about what they're running into.
Okay. I mean, these things are good to know. And hopefully now whenever someone says, it's easy, bro, just throw in a Docker container, we can just point to this video. Everyone will understand what's going on here. And it's really not that hard because all this makes perfect sense, right? Like CDNs aren't for free. Something has to tell the CDN what to and what not to host. And if you have something as impressive as rendering something and then just the stuff that's beyond the suspense then coming back down, like there's some orchestration there that's both on an infrastructure and on a framework level. And you can't really just solve that at one level. There is definitely like a combining there that's very difficult to do.
Yeah. And it's like I said, this is like, these are a few examples that I can remember. I don't even work on this project. So the people the actual maintainers, you know, there's like dozens, if not 100 of these issues they've uncovered over time.
Nice. And so do you work with Next.js, or is it more like you just have to discover when things went wrong?
So historically, it's been entirely a reverse engineering effort. The OpenNext team has set up like a suite of integration tests so that with every new version, we'll deploy it and then we'll run a bunch of tests to test every single feature that we're aware of, see what breaks. So it's like a very standard reverse engineering type of situation. I think this might change. I think we might start working more with the Next.js team, which will be great because, like I said, the goal is to make this project not necessary.
Okay, that's good. Yes, ultimately, especially a project like this, which I assume you get a lot of demanding as to what should be done, despite the fact you're like, I don't want to. This is not what I want to do right now.
Yeah, and that's why I think we're in a fairly neutral position because we're not we're not like a host. We're not like trying to like get you to host Next.js with us, and we're not like,
Yeah.
I can see with Cloudflare joining, Cloudflare is a reason to want people to host there. We have a bunch of other companies joining OpenNext as well, and they all have that same incentive, but we are the ones that are kind of neutral, where that's not why we're doing this, which is why I think it makes sense for us to kind of like spearhead it.
All right. Are there alternatives that you would suggest for hosting, in the sense that is React/Next.js the premier thing to use, or are there things that you would prefer to use yourself?
I mean, if you've made the decision to use Next.js and React, make sure that you can use Vercel at your company. A lot of companies, you're not allowed to use anything outside of whatever, because that is the best experience. It's first party. You're not going to have issues. Like, it's just not worth the headache. Just pay whatever you need to pay to like get it on there, because it's just a pain otherwise. But other than that, like I personally, it just depends on what you're building. Like, I never built anything that needs any of that, like even just basic SSR, and then you go to all these other crazy features. I just don't work on anything like that. So I, to this day, have never used an SSR framework. I just use like just Vite, and I use Solid. I don't use React, but that's where I am. But again, these things are like so interchangeable at this point.
To be fair, your only startup that everybody knows about, Terminal.shop, coffee shop, by the way, uses Go on the front end.
Oh, Adam has our landing page, which is an Astro site.
Boom. I hope that he just wrote it in some obscure framework, just used only vanilla JS just to say that. That'd be fantastic.
All right. Adam's like the web dev poster child. He used Astro, he used Tailwind, he used all the...
Yeah, we always make a joke that we will be able to accomplish any project faster if we just have Adam next to us telling us what Tailwind class to use. That's all we need to do, is just have Adam next to us, just telling us what to do. It's very, very good, because he's that good at Tailwind.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we kind of got the fun part out of the way, as I would say, I do want to have a follow-up one, which I think is going to be the more spicy of them all, which is open source VC funding. Where this kind of comes from is that, what was it, last week or earlier this week, Void Zero, which is going to be a JavaScript build pipeline, as far as I can tell, like the complete premier JavaScript build pipeline, received $4 million in VC to be a JavaScript build tool, effectively to create CMake 2.0. They got paid a lot of money to do that. And they were a part of the Excel program, so that's Vercel, right? And also Netlify invested in them, and then a whole bunch of other littler companies, I believe, also, or VC firms also invested into it. So they raised a whole bunch of money for an open source endeavor. So the spicy thing that I have, which is that open source started fundamentally from a VC point of view. I'm not sure if it's a great idea. I feel like it puts a bit of a perverse incentive into it from the very get-go. That it's designed to be built in the open, so everyone feels like it's our source control. But at the end of the day, they're building it for a specific purpose, but just using the already built kind of fandom / GitHub stars to kind of lean people into this thing, and then to kind of force them into some sort of pay as you go. My assumption is this is going to be some sort of remote build system, kind of like CMake servers. If you ever had if you've ever had Ccache backed by a build server, this is effectively the same thing, as I can tell.
Yeah. So I think I basically get to the same place that you do, where if I was, in two ways. Like, I don't know if a lot of this setup is going to be good in net. But also as a VC, I don't think I even believe in doing these types of bets. But before I get into that, so I wanted to add a little bit of perspective of what venture scale really means. And I think a lot of these conversations, there's a lot of questions that could come up about what's the business model, how are they going to make money? And I understand why people go there, but the mindset of starting a business and starting a venture business are very different things, and in a lot of ways you have to think in the opposite. So the idea with venture scale stuff is you're shooting for something really, really big, a great outcome that 99% of the people in the world would be this is life changing, is probably not good enough for a venture scale outcome, right?
Yeah.
So your mindset to even get there has to be totally different. And the example I always use is, let's say search engines did not exist. Like no one had invented them. No one had thought about them. And someone came up with one today, right? Someone invented Google. And we would all say, oh, the business model, we probably say, you get like 10 searches free per day. And then there's like a monthly subscription to use Google. That's probably what most of us would come up with. And that would probably be a very fantastic business that makes millions and millions of dollars. But the problem with that is it would never become something that every human on earth uses, right? Because there's just like a friction there to paying.
By the way, you are literally describing LLMs at this current moment, which is, here's exactly. A better search. How do we do this? Just for everyone thinking, oh, I would clearly see the correct path. This is literally what LLMs are doing today. Better search, let's use subscription.
Yep, exactly. So that's kind of exactly what's happening today. So that's what we would come up with if we invented Google today. What very few people would realize, including myself, I think this is like a crazy leap to make, is to understand that, hey, if you just make this free and just find any way to survive till every person in the world is using it, or like just a very large population, this unlocks like a totally brand new business model that you have never even thought of. Like you can build this $1 trillion ads business that not only works off of search, but also like powers ads across like the whole internet, right? It's these new business models are really, really, really hard to come up with ahead of time until you're actually there. And in hindsight, it seems obvious, but it just isn't in the moment. So when you're building something venture scale, the number one thing you really care about is this thing going to be massively, massively impacted? Like, is like the whole market effectively going to pivot to this thing? So when VCs are trying to fund these ideas, that's the first thing they're looking for, right? Like, is this actually something that can do that? And then the second thing they're looking for, and this is the harder part, is does the founder actually understand that? And I would say of the founders that raise venture scale, a small percentage of them actually get that this is what they're signing up for. Myself, I pretty much my whole career has been in venture companies I founded, companies I've worked at, has been in this category. I did not understand this until 2 years ago. And I've been professionally working like 12 or 13 years. It took me all this time to be like, oh, I've been doing it wrong this whole time. So I think this is where stuff gets tricky, right? So if you look at something like Veet, the first question, is it something that can hit that level? I think there's a future where, you don't have to agree that it will happen, but you can agree that it's possible that every single piece of JavaScript that gets written goes through their pipeline. That's like plausible, right? It's plausible to get there.
They've made it way more convenient for anyone that's been a part of Grunt all the way to Webpack knows that it has greatly convenientized everything.
Yep, exactly. So then the question is like, is the team the team that's working on this? Are they actually like really signed up and committed to this venture thing? Because it's really hard, because the more successful you get, the more opportunities show up to make more money than you've ever dreamed of that are the wrong choice. And that's like, it's so hard to constantly ignore that. And I don't really know Evan that well. So he probably is signing up for this on purpose and he gets it. But if you compare it to Bun, Jared, who I know really well, I think he's a perfect example of all this coming together. Like it's again, similar attempt, like trying to make it so every single piece of JavaScript runs through Bun. And I think as a founder, he's like very focused on all we care about is getting full adoption. And I know it sounds stupid, like grow and we'll figure out how to make money later. And there's a bunch of bad outcomes that happen, but there's also outcomes where, it does make sense. So yeah, I just want to like provide that context. If that makes sense.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, not just in the recent, just the example I gave, but VC and open source in general. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that for a second, because I do feel like there's a bit of a problem there. Whenever I see open source, I assume it's being built with the community in mind, as kind of like the ultimate goal is that there's a benevolent dictator somewhere at the top with whom or a foundation that effectively is the benevolent parliament. And their goal is to take all what the community wants, distill it down into something, or what they want, and create and continue on the project in some sort of vision, right? whether it's just like the creator saying, no, this is only my project. So Vim would be a good example. Bram just said, hey, this is my project. I'm just going to build what I want to build. He didn't want to introduce Lua because he wanted to create his own. He just wanted to create his own scripting. Like that's what he wanted, and he liked it, and he could do that because it was his project, not my project, not the community's project. It was Bram's project. And so when I see VC come in, the difficulty is that the motivation isn't this is just my project and I want it to be this way, or it's not, hey, this is the community's project. Let's try to distill everything down and make the best one. It's how does this ultimately result in us not just getting 10x the money we put in, but 100x the money we put in?
Yeah.
And so I find that to be a very perverse kind of incentive for open source in general.
Well, what's funny with anything venture scale is you as a founder, if things are going well, you can do whatever that you want. You can do the craziest shit. You can do whatever. If things are going well and you're growing, VCs will not say anything at all, right? It's only when things don't go well that all the bad stuff happens. So if you look at some of the failure modes of some of these companies, the ultimate issue is what I was saying. They failed to grow big enough to like fully capture their market. Like the goal of being venture scale didn't happen. And at that point, if it wasn't a venture scale company, it's still probably a very good outcome. And like you're probably just fine working on that for the rest of your life for a very long time. But with VC, it's binary, right? You either hit that or you don't. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, because there are projects that were, successful in that a lot of people were using them, but didn't hit that venture level. I think Gatsby is probably like the one that jumps to mind. Big enough community, but wasn't enough to sustain a venture scale business. They had to sell it, and then it kind of really didn't go anywhere from there. So yeah, it really just comes down to when it doesn't work, it's not like normal open source where it's fine. Like who cares if it's not market dominating? It's still serving a lot of people.
All right. So now let's get specific. Do you think a JavaScript build pipeline can be venture scale?
Yeah. So like I said, I believe in Bun. I think Bun, if I were to invest in Bun, I probably would do it. And again, you have to remember
that was
these
a
are
weird
seed
statement.
rounds.
If you had the opportunity to invest in Bun, would you do it?
Opportunity to invest in Bun, okay. I would do it, right? Early stage. This is a seed round. Seed rounds, you can probably more or less ignore. The venture fund that's making it, it's kind of it's not like a strong bet. It's more like if Evan shows up at your door, you are, as a venture capital firm, you're stupid to not just put money in. A seed round is nothing for them. So I wouldn't necessarily say that even they are oh yeah, we for sure know this is going to happen. It's more that, Evan's massively successful and they want to be involved in this next thing in case it becomes something. I don't know what the hell business model for Bun or for this. No clue how any of this is gonna work. I'm more just focused on can they even get to the point where they are the default choice,
Okay. All right. Very, very interesting. Yeah, because my head always just goes, instead of just trying to capture the community, what is the thing they're ultimately building toward, which is how would Bun become sustainable? Well, my assumption is that Bun really optimized for the start time and for the low memory, and they went for a specific version. So that just right away seems like, okay, they're making a serverless play ultimately, is to make the most convenient form, because they'll be able to do effectively what Vercel does for a tenth the cost, because their startup time is literally a tenth of the time as Node.
Yeah.
And so their goal is to win. But then Vercel can we're using Bun now, and they just nuked them from orbit because they have all the audience already to be able to do that. Which is kind of a weird, it just feels like this is a weird place to be.
It's difficult. You have to. That's what I'm saying. With these things, it's so hard. Not only do you have to build a once in a generation successful open source product, you then have to invent a brand new business model that nobody has ever seen before. So this stuff is just very hard, and that's why most of it doesn't work out. A great comp to look at is Docker. Very similar situation. Open source, VC funded. They did end up building something that had ridiculous impact on the industry. But who captured the value? A lot of the value was captured by AWS, Google Cloud, because all they did was support Docker on their existing platform, and now they're suddenly the big winners. And Docker did struggle for a while to figure out, they tried a bunch of things and it wasn't really working. But when they did eventually figure it out, they hit 100 million ARR in 1 year. And that's kind of the thing with these venture scale things. Like when you do hit that level of scale, if you just find something that works, like the money just like is really not comparable to non-venture scale stuff. The Docker, so I don't know if they're going to even make it that much longer, but yeah, the stuff it is difficult. And I do think a lot of stuff ends up in failure, and it's challenging because it's not like they failed because after getting 0 users, they had like a lot of users and then they'll fail. And that's what's kind of tough about this space.
That's interesting. I guess I've never really thought about the fact that Docker, they quote unquote got nuked from orbit because AWS is like, wow, that's neat. Mine now. And everybody else effectively, every hosting service, ShuttleRS, I believe, does the exact same thing. FlyIO is definitely heavy on Docker. Like everyone just used it, so they couldn't make a hosting service play. I assume they came up with I don't even actually know how they make money, but my assumption is that it's just the Docker registry, being able to upload Docker images to a registry and being able to use them. Yeah. I assume that's how they do it.
That was like a huge money loss for them. They had to like kind of shut down a lot of those operations because it was just so expensive to serve that stuff. I think this is really weird, but it was just charging for Docker desktop that got them to 100 million ARR. They like improved that. I don't feel like I've always used Linux, so like Docker just works. But I guess on other platforms, like you need like more.
I don't know what that means. You got me on that one. I'm not even sure what a desktop is. So again, like I'm already confused. Is that where you play video games from?
That's where you reboot to go play video games. Yeah, okay. You want to run Docker over there. Yeah. So like I said, this stuff is hard. And the other thing is, I think when people see this stuff, they see like VC and they imagine that as like a singular monolith. But the thing to remember with deals like this is these deals go in front of every top VC before they're done, every single one. And a lot of VCs chose not to invest. And to go further, there are some VCs that actively bet against this model. And that like, if you look at their portfolio, they never have a single thing in this category. So when it feels like VC money is pouring in, oftentimes it's like 1 or 2 firms that have some kind of feeling that this is going to work out, and they just bet really hard on it. This case is a good example because if you look at Excel, who led this round, their big initial data point was they invested in Vercel, which had NextJS, which was an open source product. That product became massive. It became the default for React, huge default for all front end and arguably. And then they were able to build Vercel, the company, around it. So from Excel's point of view, they're like, wow, this is like a great model. It works really well. So they are in every single deal that looks anything like this. And it's pretty much only them in a lot of ways. So if you pay attention to who's investing, you'll see it's like the same people over and over. And if you look at other top VC firms, there's some firms that are never in these deals. So you can assume that they're taking the opposite side of the bet, that this is all not going to work out. So reality is nobody knows, and there's equal people betting against it as there are betting for it.
Okay. That's. I guess I never really thought about that. This is why I'm glad to have you around me. You have all the inside baseball on VCs. I think I do think something that's very unfair is that generally every time someone hears VCs or private equity, they just assume, oh, evil intent. I'm not assuming evil intent. I'm assuming they want profit at some point. Mm-hmm. And so that is where like the problem kind of comes from, because I don't have that perspective that all VC is evil. And I know that is a very prevailing wind right now. And you can see that a lot with like the WordPress drama. Everyone's like, oh yeah, the private equity. And you're like, well, that's not the problem here. Okay, that's not the real problem. Is that there were no rules to begin with, and someone made a thriving company off the fact that there were no rules, and now they want rules, right? Like that's the real problem. There is that the expectations were not correctly defined.
Yeah. It's like ultimately, and the same thing I was saying with OpenNext, like it doesn't need to be malicious. It can just be broken without anyone having any like evil type of intent. Stuff just doesn't work out, and a lot of VC doesn't work out, and it's all based on power laws. Like you're gonna have a few wins that are so ridiculously large that all those even like half wins were like kind of irrelevant. So yeah, they encourage you to go for the biggest possible thing. And I think this can be negative because maybe you don't want to do that. But for me, at least personally, like we are a VC funded open source company. Like we are in this category.
And what is we? Can you clarify?
SST. Okay. So I primarily work on SST. Every single line of code we've ever written has been open source, MIT licensed. But we are VC funded, right? And we are going for that venture scale outcome. So yeah, we are also part of this situation. And if it doesn't work out, because the three of us are very committed to something venture scale, if the opportunity turns out it could be successful, but like not at that level, we're probably not going to continue to work on it, right? So is the problem there really VCs? No, it's really like it just didn't fit with our goals of what we want to spend our time on. So yeah, it's just complicated. There's just like a lot of reasons why this stuff cannot work out. And it's hard to find something that's like, this is going to be around forever. It's not going to change in ways you don't like. It's going to be 100% backwards compatible. Like the world is just an infinitely changing thing. So it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And hey, you have people that are actively using SST, including terminal.shop, which you can only order coffee by the SSH.
There you go. Got the plug in.
Hey, by the way, so for those that don't know, Dax and I and two others started this company, terminal.shop, and it has slowly kind of grown from there. And it started kind of as almost like a joke, kind of like a funny perspective on the market. So since you have all this knowledge and understanding and all this sweet VCing and all that, why did you choose to invest your time into terminal.shop?
Because they're just different itches you want to scratch. And this one, I just liked all of you and I wanted to like build stuff with you guys, and just lets me do like fun stuff, you know, without it having to be venture scale. Like I love doing the venture scale thing and it's so fun and addicting and I'm going to do that probably forever. But it's also nice just to be like, hey, we did this thing and, you know, 1,000 people thought it was the coolest thing ever. And it's like a lot more intimate, and that has its own value as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's like a nice balance against the other stuff that I do.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just the fun of creating something that somebody likes. So it's not even, and working with super cool people.
There we go.
No, that's precisely why I wanted to do it too, is that, you know, I was just at Netflix and I didn't want, I just constantly doing big company stuff. I didn't want to go the venture scale startup route and just work 1,000 hours a week on just like a product. Instead, I just wanted to be able to create something that people are like, oh, this is super cool. And then that's really it. I just wanted someone to be like, the greatest moment of my life, or of the terminal.shop life, was the fact that somebody said, they came up to a mutual friend and said, dude, I ordered coffee from the terminal. It's super cool. And then that mutual friend was like, yeah, I know the guys that run it. And they're just like, like someone ordered it that's not even in our circle. And that was just like the coolest moment.
Too. Yeah. My Liz's friend's boyfriend was talking to her about it. And she was like, wait, what? Like, I think I know those people. So yeah, it's just, it's fun. Cause that's like, I think a lot of open source is like this too. It's like, you have a lot of people have like a creative expression that they want to do, and open source is often that. So when VC comes in, I see how it feels like a violation of this like kind of sacred zone, which is why, like, I would say I'm like kind of mixed on it. Like I have a company in this category, but I think a lot of it doesn't work out, and I think a lot of it is better off not shooting for this giant outcome that's probably not really likely.
Well, thanks for helping us on this situation, both on the NextJS side and on open source generally speaking. I think that I'm just super happy you said all these words, because I cannot tell you how many. I think I said it during the Void Zero thing. I just said that it's really hard to actually host NextJS. And I must have gotten at least 200 YouTube comments that were just like, dude, you're an idiot. You don't know anything. It's clear that you don't know anything. You didn't quit Netflix. You got fired because of how stupid you were. And it's just like, man, where did all of this come from? And so it's good to have just a nice video that is just like, and here you go. Here's the presentation of why it is. Both can be true, by the way. Both can be true. That's fair. Both can be true at the exact same time. I may be an idiot, but it also can be hard to host. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time and joining us. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
SST for life.
All right, I'm gonna hop off.
Bye.
See you, everyone. Bye bye.